Work smarter, not harder. Now, you've undoubtedly heard this advice somewhere, if not everywhere, but what does that even mean? And are people just calling us dumb because we're not working smart enough? I don't think that's what they mean at all. So what does it really mean to work smarter, not harder? I think the key here is to really understand how your own mind works and then be able to leverage those unique abilities in order to be able to propel yourself forward with less time, energy, effort, and all that kind of stuff than just sticking to the grind. And if you haven't looked into this kind of stuff yet, then perhaps you may still be working against your brain. Don't worry though, that's precisely what we're going to be talking about. Now here I am going to give you semi-questionable advice. But let me explain. I'm going to talk specifically in this video about using the example of scheduling based on task completion. I think this is something that a lot of us can actually relate to, so I'm going to use this, but you can definitely expand this idea to understand how your mind works in other ways so that you can optimize your process. So let's say you have a blog post to write. Do you sit down, write that article or that blog post all in one go, and then you're done? That sounds amazingly focused and productive and wonderful. That's also nowhere near what I do. That may be for better or for worse, but let's argue for the better in this case. Now, first off, we all have different personalities and different strengths and different ways that we work best. So the key here is finding what works best for you. And that's why I called it questionable advice. And while there are plenty of people out there telling you the best and most productive systems and habits and ways to do things, remember that ultimately the best way is whatever works in your case. So this is what works for me, but I in no way intend to imply that this is the best way to do it. And if something else works better for you, definitely do that. Now, when we go back to that task completion idea, personally, I'm not quite as analytical as I once thought. I have a science background and I used to seek those very clear-cut, logical, concrete, rational solutions to things, but I definitely work better as a creative than an analyst. And with that creativity and intuition comes this tendency for ideas to just kind of pop out of nowhere. We call it inspiration. Usually while I'm working on one thing, that'll inspire some other idea, and this can end up being kind of distracting and end up derailing my entire effort on whatever it was that I was working on to begin with. Now, I know what this sounds like, and there are plenty of people who would stop me here and just advise me to work on my discipline and focus and ignore these distractions in pursuit of finishing that first task. I will respectfully disagree. Yes, discipline is a great skill to have, but creativity is a discipline itself, and it deserves a seat at the table. So when one of these inspired ideas come up, I say follow it. This inspiration comes from our intuition, which is largely still a mysterious sort of function of the brain that's kind of connecting all those dots in the background while we're doing something else. Your brain comes up with this new idea or observation seemingly out of nowhere, but it's really coming from all the other things that you're taking in, all the information, all of the different pieces and the different thoughts, and it's actually synthesizing these things, and when it interrupts you with some great idea, I say we listen to it. Your brain is telling you that it's been working hard behind the scenes, unbeknownst to you, and it has now produced this gem of insight for you. We would be foolish to just ignore it. Now this goes back to that whole idea of working smarter, not harder. Sure, we could push it to the side and keep pressing on with whatever it was that we were working on originally, but in my experience, that's never been what's best for the situation, for my creativity for sure, and even for my productivity. Now in terms of that productivity, I think the productivity community as a whole is kind of over-obsessed with discipline. But again, in my mind, forcing the completion of something else and sacrificing an inspired idea is actually more detrimental in the end. And honestly, counterproductive. But like I started with, this is what works best for me. And if you're better with just sticking to one thing and ignoring all those distractions and insights, then you go with that. My mind does not like to follow schedules and refuses to color within the lines, so I find it best to just follow it wherever it may wander. I cannot guarantee this method is going to work for you. But what I can say is if you've been sticking to a strict schedule and just trying to ignore distractions and get things completed and ended up feeling like you were forcing yourself a lot of the times, then it may be worthwhile for you to experiment with this idea and just follow your whims. Now, I know this can't always be applied to every situation because if you are working for someone and you have certain tasks that you have to complete, of course, you still have to stick to that kind of schedule. But if things come up along the way that you're able to at least write down or save in some way for later, that's a great way to benefit from this inspiration that comes up while still getting your other things done. Now, case in point, this whole idea actually came from while I was working on a segment about scheduling. This whole idea came up and I just ran with it. I kept talking about it, and afterwards I quickly wrote everything down. It's actually originally from an article on our website, and it's kind of funny and a little bit meta in a way that This whole piece came out of this idea itself that was actually happening, if that made any sense. Now, when I came up with this, I literally sat down and my fingers blurted out 2 whole pages of text. And just like that, I was done for the moment. I had to set it aside. I had followed that inspired whim and written it down and recorded it for later. And then I let my mind chew on it for a couple weeks. I came back 2 weeks later and finished it up, polished it up a little bit, and it is what it is today. Now, if I had tried to force myself to sit down and write about this idea, which I wouldn't have even had to begin with, not only would it have taken a whole lot longer, as many of my other articles have when I try and force myself to do these things, but it also wouldn't have included this real world experience and this genuine, inspired thought, or I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I hope that makes sense. I didn't have to force it, I just let my brain come up with what it knows best, and all I had to do was record it down for later. I hope this gave you some things to think about and maybe inspired you to try this out as well. See if it works for you and let me know in the comments below. There's a lot more content coming on this channel and you're always welcome here. I hope to see you in the next one.